Hello and welcome to the Move Well, Live Well podcast.
We are your hosts, Antonio Capasso and Dave Fell, and we are here to help you, the listener, live a better life through exercise, nutrition, and mindset. The aim of this podcast is to motivate, inspire, and educate the masses, giving practical tips and golden nuggets on how to get moving and live a healthy and fulfilled life.
This podcast is for anybody who's wanting to exercise but struggles to get started or to make it stick. It's for anybody who's chasing goals but never seems to feel satisfied, or simply anyone who wants to live a healthier and happier life.
As a licensed sport and exercise psychologist, I use my knowledge of human behaviour and psychological theory to help both everyday people and Olympic level athletes achieve their performance and lifestyle goals.
I'm an online coach and former unfulfilled corporate cog. I've built a platform through providing healthy and budget recipes and practical exercise tips to as many people as I can. I'm not the biggest, leanest, strongest or fittest coach, but I do pride myself in being the most well-balanced. We want you to take away so many golden nuggets from this podcast that you'll have to eat them with milk.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Move Well, Live Well podcast. We are on to episode 3. Of course, I'm your host and I'm joined with my co-host Dave. How are you getting on?
Oh, good this week, ready to go.
Awesome. This episode is going to be on how to become ruthlessly consistent. We've obviously discussed the importance of fitness and exercise. We've discussed, the importance of really setting that golden goal and the different types of goals and how you can utilize them to really make sure you stay on track and reach that long-term outcome goal. Now we're going to look at some of the things that you can start to do, and give you a bucket full of hints and tips so that you can stay consistent on actually working towards achieving your long-term goal. All right, because we know that consistency trumps all.
Yeah, I'm absolutely buzzing for today's episode because honestly, I've been harping on to my mates for years about the importance of consistency, and I would say, obviously, I don't credit myself with having this as an original quote, but I've said to my mates all throughout, when they talk about, because I used to be an overweight kid in my teenage years, and they asked me how I did it, and I always said about it, consistency is key. So today, as Tony mentioned, you are going to leave with an absolute bucket full of relative and practical tips about how you can stay ruthlessly consistent to be able to work towards your goals, and why consistency is the most important thing in order to help you get there. And absolutely pumped for it. Let's get into the meat and bones, shall we?
Let's do it. Yeah. So the first thing, and it's obviously we're going to say it's based off last episode, having clear goals, right? You're not going to be consistent. You're not going to stay on track if you haven't done what we've been preaching to you from the very start, which is just setting that clear goals so you know what you need to start working towards, and then putting into play those process and those small performance goals that you can keep using to give you that boost of dopamine, give you those nice feelings of self-mastery, nice feelings of sense of achievement as well.
Exactly. And having clear goals is obviously, something that we talked about, having that outcome, and then, as you mentioned, the process goals. So what are those daily habits that are moving that needle in the right direction to where you want to get to? So that could be whatever in terms of obviously achieving your goal, but it could be hitting your 10K steps, getting your sleep, hitting your nutrition, tracking your food intake, whatever it is. So today, those are the bits, having that clear goal, and then these are the bits that to work towards. And then what we are going to take you through today is the importance of consistency and how to ultimately stay consistent on those process goals, so then you can achieve that big overall goal that is so, so important.
Yeah, perfect. And the first thing we're going to start speaking about is your systems.
Absolutely, because so it's James Clear that said this in the book Atomic Habits. He said, if you set yourself a goal but cannot reach it, it's not that you're unmotivated or uncommitted, it's just that your systems are wrong. And I think this is really powerful because a lot of people and a lot of what they struggle with is, how often do we hear it? I'm feeling unmotivated today, not feeling like doing this, but actually it's your systems that are going to be able to get you there for those times that you're feeling unmotivated. And it will happen to 100% of people listening to this podcast. If you are motivated to achieve your goals every single day. You're not human. Fair play if you are, but I certainly am not. Tony, I don't know if you are either.
Definitely not.
But ultimately, what we're going to talk about in terms of the systems piece is we are understanding that you are not going to be motivated the other day, and it's ultimately your systems and your habits that are going to help you stay consistent to then achieving that goal.
Yeah, awesome. So habits. What do we mean by them? Well, your habits are things that you do on the daily. They become a routine. They become part of almost that automated part of you. I know for me, I wake up, whether it's healthy or not, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is I need to get that morning coffee in because it's a habit, right? I know that every day I wake up, I want my coffee. Probably for some certain other reasons, such as the caffeine hit that I'm getting from it. But also the way that I've already started tying something into that is that I put a scoop of my clear, was it non-tasting? What's the better word for that?
Unflavored.
Non-taste, unflavored creatine into my coffee because I know that creatine, and there's been loads of research around creatine, not just for muscular benefits, but also for cognitive benefits around the importance of it. So already I built up the habit of having morning coffee, put my scoop of creatine in it. And now it's got to the point where I'm on holiday, I go and make a coffee and I'm looking for my creatine because I'm like, there's something missing from my habit and the routine of what I'm doing here. Put in the coffee, put in a little bit of milk so you don't burn the coffee, pour in the hot water, put in a scoop of sugar, and then I'm like, where's my scoop of creatine? All right, so that's just how one small habit that I personally do is already started, becoming that routine. It's automated. I'm not even thinking about it.
That's 100%, and I think you've raised a really good point there, because when you guys think of systems, or when we want you to think of systems, we want you to consider and you to think about that this is your default mode of thinking, right? So just like Tony was saying there, when he goes to make a coffee, he's already looking for that creatine scoop because that's a really good healthy habit that he's then got into. So we want to make achieving your goals and staying consistent as you are with brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately when we talk about system, is that before you go to bed, you're going to brush your teeth and then you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And what systems or habits can you put in or can you make stick to make it as consistent as you would be with brushing your teeth every day or whatever it is? So what do you do other than that, Tony? Or how have you built in other things like using the creatine, for example, to help you achieve some of your other goals maybe?
Yeah, so it starts with having non-negotiables. I always say this. I say that again, just like how you don't rise to level your goals, fall to level your systems. I always think, first of all, it's having my non-negotiables. Right, when things happen in the week that are going to be uncontrollable,
It's always going to happen.
Which is always going to happen, right? You're never going to have the perfect week, and if you do, God cherish that week. But what is my priority? Well, one of the priorities, right, is saying that you want to engage in one form of exercise, or to achieve your goal, you need to go and do, let's say, 3 runs a week. Okay, that's a non-negotiable. Okay, and then I look at, how can I start fitting that into my schedule? We talked about planning in the last episode. The reason why that's so important is because you need to have, these 3 times in my week are non-negotiable. They're penciled in and I cannot change from that, because already you're being a bit more rigid and a bit more firm and a bit more authoritative in how you're holding yourself accountable.
Yeah, and ultimately, just by taking that steps of planning, you're already pushing the needle further towards and actually achieving that. And then to build up on what you were saying about, if your goal is to get better at running, something that I did when I was training for Barcelona Marathon is when I went to sleep at night. And again, so this is what we talk about. How do you make those habit sticks and making it as easy as possible for yourself to actually achieve that? Because humans, we are creatures of path of least resistance. We want the easiest route. We want to take that and make it as easy as possible for ourselves. So when I was training for Barcelona, I had track sessions that are Tuesday, 7 a.m. And for anybody that knows me, I absolutely hate getting up anytime before 7 a.m. But I would actually have to get up at like 6:20 in order to be able to go to that track session, in order to be able to achieve my outcome-based goal, which was running Barcelona Marathon. And then these were the little bits that helped me get there. And actually, what the things that I was doing in order to help me achieve and get to that run. So when I would go to bed on night, I would make sure that I would go to bed half an hour earlier and stop scrolling half an hour before I plan to go to bed. And in order to help me do that, I would not put my phone on charge next to me when I was sleeping. I would put it on charge on the other side of the room. So then my alarm goes off in the morning, I have to physically get up and actually turn it off, because that was when it was winter. This was January, February, March. And when it's still dark outside and you have to get up, that is an absolutely brutal wake up. So then how can then, you take this one habit and how can you go even further? So I'd make sure that I was not scrolling before bed late at night. So to do that, I'd put my phone on charge on the other side of the room. If I wanted to then use my phone before bed, I had to stand up, and I'm not going to stand up in my boxers freezing cold before bed. I would just okay, put that down away. And then I would actually put my running clothes and my running shoes under my phone on charge on the opposite side of the room, okay? So again, I'm making it as easy as possible. I'm taking out that decision making in the morning because it's already laid out for me. So as soon as my alarm goes off, and again, we want to make it as easy as possible for me to get up, get out and get to that track session in the morning. As soon as my alarm goes off, I have to physically get out of bed, which is always the hardest part of getting up in the morning. Physically get out of bed, go and turn off my alarm. My phone is actually on top of my running clothes. So all I need to do from there after I've turned off my alarm is get changed into the clothes that I've already laid out. And by that point, I'm up and I'm changing to my running gear before I've even had time to realize what's going on. I'm actually awake. And then by that point, I'm like, right, okay, now all I need to do is actually get myself. So when we talk about, okay, how to stay consistent, it's what are these little habits and how can you set up your environment to make sure you're making it as easy as possible for yourself to then go and do that thing, the process-based thing, so then you can achieve that outcome-based goal.
Yeah, fantastic. And what I'm hearing Dave say a lot of here, but he's not quite mentioning it, he's hinting at it, is we're speaking about barriers. Okay, so the other part of building these habits is also looking at, well, what's currently going on in my life, or what are the barriers that are stopping me from being able to, with ease, actually carry out these habits or actually work towards these goals. So a classic barrier, for example, could be access to a gym, or I often hear people say, and one of my issues I had previously this year was that my gym was a half an hour commute away from my house. So already that's a big barrier that's stopping me from going and engaging, or just going to do a gym session. Suddenly a 1 hour gym session has become 2 hours because it's then take out a chunk of my day. So that was something I had to actually really think about and say, okay, I enjoy this gym. It's a nice gym, but ultimately, is it worth an extra hour's commute or round commute? So, think about those barriers that are stopping you from actually engaging in these habits, or are making it harder for you to build these habits and make it more productive for you and actually fit into your very busy life and schedule. Another classic barrier that you were just speaking about there is the idea of, well, what is stopping you from going for that morning run? We speak about, I'm always really tired in the morning. Okay, that's a barrier. So here you can see how Dave has very successfully, model student Dave, has very successfully worked backwards and, figured out that phone is an issue for him. And that is what is actually creating these barriers. What are the controllable barriers in your life that you can start work around? And the ones that are out of your control, well, how can you minimize the impact that they're having on you? I really like the example again of putting the clothes under the phone. The amount of times that people will be motivated in the night, you might have watched some David Goggins video or Joe Rogan, and you're pumped up at night, and then you wake up in the morning, you're tired, and and your brain, and again, we'll speak about this very shortly, but your brain is trying to give you reasons as to why not to go out on the run, because it's seeking comfort, it's wanting to go back to bed, it's wanting to be asleep. Well, already you've broken down the barrier there, because you're like, well, actually, I've got my shoes ready, everything's sorted out. I've told Dan that I'm going to go and meet him for a run, right? These are all the ways that you're reducing some of those barriers again of like getting up in the morning, you're running late because you didn't have anything laid out the night before. So now your 10K that you want to do is going to have to change to a 7K, etc.
Want to become a stronger, better and faster runner? You don't need another cookie cutter program, you need a coach. Cooper is a coach in your pocket, and they provide real structure, real expertise and real accountability. And because you're a Move Well, Live Well listener, you'll get an extended 2-week free trial when you sign up and use the code MOVEWELL on the app. Cooper, not a plan, a coach. Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And this is what we've been discussing about how can you actually fit it into your life and how can you prime your environment. And it doesn't have to be as extreme as, getting up and going to a 7 a.m. run club. For you guys out there, it could be, if you do school run and you usually drive, or if you take your kids to swimming practice or whatever it is, it's getting in the habit, okay? So you're going to be there for 45 minutes or whatever it is. And instead of like sitting and scrolling on your phone, can you either like read a book, or can you maybe like do, okay, so I'm going to do 10 laps walking around the pool or the sports center or whatever it is. So then you're kind of trying to figure out ways to fit it into your life where you're not actually adding any time, but you're building up these little habits. So when I'm taking my child to a swimming lesson or whatever it is, I can do 10 laps of the thing and then I can sit down. So it's how do you then prime your environment and have a think about, because you're not actually adding any time there, but you are implementing a healthy habit, which is ultimately going to push you towards where you want to be.
Yeah, awesome. And that leads us on. Now you've built up these habits, you've reduced the barriers. Well, how are you going to reward yourself, right? That's the favorite part. We spoke about last episode, right? It's the best bit. How can you track the progress and actually give yourself those rewards? And what's one of the best ways? What's one of the best ways to
on the mind?
What's one of the best ways to actually track that progress?
I think there are many ways to do it. I personally get my clients, we've got an app which they can then look back, and that's digitally. But for a lot of people, it could be as simple as having a calendar, and it could be X's or crosses. That's the same thing. X's or O's. So if you
didn't even realize.
Yeah. So if you hit your goal, you're then maybe, or it could be a tick. So on any days that you have your daily, your daily bits to get you there. And again, that could be tracking food, it could be sleep, it could be nutrition, whatever it is. Any day that you hit that on your calendar, you give it a tick. And if you don't hit it, you give it a cross. And actually being able to track that progress from the goals that you've set yourself. So you've got this overall goal, and then you've got the little bits that you need to do daily. If you hit those daily goals, then you are ticking them off or whatever it is. And if you can see that visually, that is such a powerful tool to help you stay more consistent. Because ultimately, at the end of the month or that period of time, you can then look back and you can be like, okay, did I achieve my goal? Yes, amazing, brilliant. How come? Because I've got more ticks than I've got crosses on that calendar or whatever it is. Or on the flip side, did I achieve my goal? No. Well, why didn't I? What were the reasons? Because I actually haven't hit my daily goals enough for me to be able to do that. So it could be a calendar, you could have a notebook, you could do it digitally, or get someone, as I do with my clients, and then track that from there. However it is, that's up to you. But what is really important is that you are tracking it and you can see it visually and you are referring to it every single day. And then that is how you're ultimately going to become very, very consistent, because if you are ticking that daily box or whatever it is and actually physically doing it, that is such a powerful tool that you can use.
Yeah, 100%. So the key here is make that progress chart or whatever, or using an app, make it visual so you can literally see what's happening here, because it is so hard to look at progress when you're trying to look in the mirror every day and you're not seeing any change, or you're still going out for that. We keep using the same examples. You're still going out for that 10K, right? And you're still feeling exhausted by the end of it. Actually being able to see on a chart and tick that off, and that's why the running apps have become so popular. Shout out to Cooper, but they are becoming so popular, right? Because it's that way of like, one, it's going to help with accountability, which we will start speaking about, but two, it's just so useful for being able to turn around and say, wow, like I can tick that off. I've done that run today. That's something I've done to better myself. And you can see, even if you don't feel it in the moment, you can actually see it. And I love looking on Instagram. We see people show their progress videos, and you can see that like actually between January and March, there wasn't much difference. But actually by the time you get to December, you're like, oh my God, they have like just stayed consistent and they've ticked off those small wins and they've got themselves to this really big long-term goal. So it is very much doing the visual. And again, it's really satisfying mentally for you to be able to just tick it off. You get that sense of achievement. You're going to get that release. You're going to get some of those feelings that we do crave as a species. But now, because of how we understand how the brain works, we can now start utilizing them to our advantage, and actually so they work for us rather than our brain working against us.
100%, and it's really key what you mentioned there about that feeling good, that dopamine hit of ticking off that box because you've achieved your daily goals. And sometimes you can't, or you don't want to think about this big scary goal, but actually that ticking of the box, if you do that 80% of the time, then ultimately you are going to achieve that big goal. And that's because you've hit your daily actions and you've been able to track it, and you're doing amazing. So keep it up. One thing that we've already spoken about or briefly mentioned here is the accountability piece. And again, so one thing that I mentioned there is obviously I was going to a run club, and having that community, which obviously you're very big on, as am I, is really, really important. And the likelihood of me going to a 7 a.m. track session in the winter by myself is slim to none, all right? But in this group chat or whatever it is, I've actually told people that I'm going to go. And I've kind of like messaged one of my friends and be like, okay, we're meeting at this time. And just by kind of like saying it to someone else and being there and doing it with other people, I've increased my sense, like my chances of going by 1,000,000%, obviously not that, but a huge percentage, right? And as I mentioned, I would very rarely go and do it by myself. But if you are doing it with someone else, or if you're making yourself accountable, that is such a key piece for actually being able to stick to it. And that doesn't have to be, you don't have to go to a community run club or whatever it is. It could be as simple as having a conversation with your partner and be like, look, I really want to achieve this goal. It could be lose 10 kilograms or whatever it is. And I'm telling you, please, can you just help me? I'm making myself accountable, and then being able to go from there. So it could be a friend, it could be a partner, it could be a family member, it could be a community, it could be to people on your social media. Like we've seen a lot of people now that they actually kind of create like a progress account, and you could have that in private. But if you are making yourself accountable in some way, you are going to make that goal so much more achievable, and ultimately you're going to have the support of others as well, which is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. I quite often will use like a close friend story so that I can just quietly share to mates, being like, I want to achieve, like, I'm working on this goal. Often it's like in the gym, I'll just quietly be like, right, I want to work on this goal, and it keeps me accountable, because as soon as you verbalize it, it becomes way more real. But then as soon as you tell other people, it becomes even more real, and you have even more of an attachment to it. Because what you want to do is attach yourself to the goal so that you're more likely and more invested in achieving it. So as soon as I've turned around to Dave, for example, and said, right, I want to hit this weight on my bench press, and I'm going to, I tend to cheat a little bit because I don't give a time. But let's say I was going to behave and actually say, I want to do this within 5 weeks. And then Dave turns around and says, Antonio, you've not put anything on a close friend story for a week. I'm going to be way more embarrassed, and I'm going to be way more annoyed at myself that I haven't stayed true to what I said I wanted to achieve and the goal that I set myself out. So it's just a very quick way, right, of being accountable. That's how you can utilize social media for the positives rather than for some of the negatives that social media can give us. It's that way of voicing it so that other people around you can help you and guide you towards that, rather than just thinking you have to do everything by yourself.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And honestly, you can never underestimate the power of being accountable to someone, because again, going back to when I started my social media, I joined a mentorship and I wanted to achieve X amount of online clients by this date and X amount of followers by this date. I can't remember the exact timings, but the fact that I had a weekly call with my mentor, and then I knew that if I didn't have that call, there is no real fear of, what is this person going to say, or how is this going to make them feel? If it's just you're like, okay, so I didn't achieve that, kind of like, so what? But if you actually have to go and you have to answer to someone and you have to explain, why did you not hit this goal? Or what's kind of the struggles, or you did achieve it, that for me was so much more motivating, because then we're like, okay, so I achieved this. This is how I'm working towards that 30 online clients, which it was for me at the start. And then I knew that, right, okay, so I'm actually going to have to do this work, because that call is coming next Friday no matter what happens. And I really, really don't want to go into that call, turning up empty-handed and being like, okay, yeah, I just didn't do it because of X, Y, or Z. It's all just excuses. But when you make yourself accountable, and if you have to be accountable to someone, then actually you're going to have that kind of thing in your brain to think, okay, we're going to have this conversation anyway. I want to make sure that I can go into that confidently and say I've done X, Y, and Z. Yeah,
I love this. And that accountability part, and being able to actually be reflective and be honest, especially when you're speaking to someone that's mental, that I'm sure there was even more investment, because there's also a financial dedication that you were putting towards that as well. But by just having to be honest with yourself, you then start understanding perhaps some of the excuses that you were giving yourself weren't as valid as you first thought. And that's where quite often with clients, and this can be in a performance setting, not just in a time in terms of, trying to reach, just small exercise goals. Actually, no goal is small, but just trying to reach a goal of engaging exercise. I find even with top performers, I have to run through, this technique and skill and help them build it, which I'll sort of explain to you guys now. So my first question is, and often I get a similar answer from people, but Dave, have you heard of the chimp paradox?
I've heard of it, and I know there's a book, but I haven't read it.
Okay. This is exactly the kind of response I get from so many athletes. And to be honest with you, it's music to my ears, because it means that actually we're going to have a really good, insightful session and a lot of discussion. But effectively, the chimp paradox, and the reason why I use it with a lot of clients is it was created by Dr. Steve Peters, and it's a really nice way of breaking down neuroscience without having to get really technical and really advanced. And it's almost, you spoke to me earlier about being able to explain it to a 10-year-old, right? And sometimes I do have to explain it to 10-year-olds, and they can understand and actually get around this concept, and it's something that they can utilize. So the idea behind the chimp paradox is that our brains are actually very similar in certain areas to chimpanzees. So this researcher, he did he's looking at brain scans of chimps, and he realized that then in a certain area of the brain, in the limbic system, it was very similar to a human brain. And it turns out we're actually born with this part of our brain, and it's all to do with our emotions, and it's all to do with our fight, flight, freeze response we have, and it's all to do with our survival. So it's very instinctual. But the trouble is, it's very impulsive, and it only thinks in the moment, and it gets sort of overwhelmed by the short-term desires rather than looking at long-term. But what we develop over time, and it's found in our prefrontal lobe, is we develop this empathetic, logical, long-term, thoughtful, empathetic part of us. Okay, and that's really important, because when we're starting to look at our goals and we're starting to look at the reasons we start to give us around why I might not want to go on that run, or it's raining, I can't really be bothered, or I'd actually just want to stay in and watch Netflix, we can start looking at, okay, well, who is in control here? Is it that logical, empathetic, reasoning person? Or is it that more animalistic, emotionally driven, irrational part of us that's just trying to go for the short-term dopamine, that's trying to go for that short-term release and that idea of comfort, and seeking almost instant reward rather than the long-term? And the final area which I need to mention is the computer. And the computer is what we've been mentioning. It's our habits and our automated behaviors. So what you've trained yourself to do over time, or the way that you've been used to acting and behaving in certain situations or scenarios. Does that make sense to you, Dave?
We're making sense.
Okay, perfect. And the reason why I like to speak about this is because when we link this to trying to go and achieve our goals, right? When we create a goal, it's probably the human that's in control. We're able to sit and we can think logically and think, right, okay, I want to do this. And we sit down, we peel back the why, and we can really understand it.
And that's when it's easy, right? Because that's when you have time. That's when you're not acting out of emotion.
Exactly. Precisely. So you are in control. You're in the driving seat. Okay. Now what can happen is the week then comes, right? And the uncontrollable stuff happens, and we start to get a bit fatigued. And suddenly the chimp starts taking control. Okay, and it's fine. That is what happens. But it's now your choice as to whether you're going to let the chimp stay in control, okay, and move you away from, we call it, so making towards or away moves. So are you gonna do the short-term release of staying in? If it's, we're now coming towards the winter, so staying in, getting nice and cozy, or making like a nice meal, and you say, and you can convince yourself, it's going to be a nice, nutritious meal, but ultimately you're still not going out and doing that bit of exercise. So you're going to move away from this overall long-term goal that you told yourself that you'd do, and you said you're going to be this type of person. Or, and we'll do a quick exercise in a moment to help us. Are you going to actually catch that thought, catch that feeling, and realize who's got in control? And you're going to actually remove yourself and detach yourself away from that, and make the towards moves towards this person you want to be, towards that long-term goal, towards that bigger achievement that you're working towards. And so one of the ways in which we can really do this is quite simplistic is just by starting to get used to watching your thoughts. So we have thousands of thoughts every day, and we all know this, but actually we can be really bad for not picking up on the fact that it's just a thought, right? It's nothing more than just words or pictures. It's actually, it's the weight that we give it that then makes it feel real. And a simple exercise you can do just to stop yourself from doing that, and we call it diffusion. So I'm really going to start geeking out here, right? But we call it diffusion. So when you're fused, you're sitting within your thoughts. When you're defused, okay, you've managed to take a step away from your thoughts, okay? So you've gone from being the thinking self. So thinking self is, I've got to do this later. Oh, I'm feeling a bit tired. Oh, God, will I need to go for the toilet on a run? Do I need to? All right, that's the thinking self. The observed self is the person that sort of observes and realizes that these thoughts are coming in, and the person that stays constant within, okay? And very quickly you can go from thinking self to observed self by just doing a task which is called the I am thinking. So what's a classic thought you had when you were training for the Barcelona half? Oh, sorry, Barcelona full.
I really want to stay in bed and not get up while it's dark and wet outside.
Okay, right. So I really want to stay in bed, okay? Say that out loud.
I really want to stay in bed.
Right. Really convincing, right?
I'm pretty convinced.
Yeah, as in it feels like something you're wanting to do with your whole self, right? Now I want you to say, I'm having the thought, I want to stay in bed.
I'm having a thought that I want to stay in bed.
How's that feel?
Already, this is not scripted, by the way. Already, it feels like, it's just a thought. Like, by actually taking that time out and being, instead of I want to stay in bed, it's like I'm thinking that I want to stay in bed.
Now I want you to turn around and say, I'm noticing I'm having a thought, I want to stay in bed.
I'm noticing that I'm having a thought that I want to stay in bed.
Okay. How's that now feeling?
It takes what is, kind of like a statement about what you want to do. And then it just kind of kind of dilutes it in a way to say, well, actually, I'm just noticing that I might be thinking this way about doing this rather than thinking I want to do this.
Yeah. And then the final step is I'm noticing that my chimp is having a thought, I want to stay in bed.
Okay. So I'm noticing my chimp is having a thought that I want to stay in bed. And then that, I guess, I already feel, just by recognizing that it's my chimp, that it's like, that's just my chimp having that thought. And I don't need to give in to the thoughts or feelings of whatever that chimp is feeling. And then I can then basically control. Did you just do the thing to me?
Boom. Right. Yeah, right. So you can see how just this simple exercise can be really powerful. But the exercise has no weight or power at all if you can't recognize when your chimp is like to show up. Okay. So again, just like how we spoke about barriers earlier on, right? Well, now, when is it likely that your chimp is going to start coming into play? Because that's when you need to start really paying attention to your thoughts. Yeah, we have no power if we don't catch it at the source, and we wait until the next day and we go, oh, fuck, that chimp was there and I didn't even realize it. So when we're also planning out that week, also think about, okay, well, on which days is it likely that my chimp's going to show up and it's going to be pretty loud and I'm going to be pretty tired, so I might be susceptible to, slipping into that mistake of letting it take control. And again, right, the classic examples, and we do keep using it because it's so relatable, is the early mornings, right? Or another one for me was always just like after work on a Tuesday at my old job, because I knew that I'd been working and delivering all day. So I was probably on my feet, feeling tired, body was feeling a little bit achy. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we want to start being able to recognize, because when we can recognize, we can then start to release. And what I mean by release is we release that thought. Okay, and what we're doing by doing this exercise, we're diffusing. Okay, so we're separating ourselves from the thought, and then we're turning into the observed self. Okay, so self as context. We realize that the thoughts are almost like clouds. All right, the thoughts are coming by, or they're like waves. Actually, clouds is better for this example.
Yeah, clouds.
They're like clouds, but the observed self is the sky, the blue sky you can constantly see behind. Okay, and on those days when we're tired, the clouds are going to be thicker. So we need to get better at recognizing when those thoughts are showing up, and they might be really fast flowing and there might be loads of reasons why you can think of, but actually it's just a thought and it's just a feeling. And when I actually step back and observe it and look at it for what it is, we can be a bit more objective rather than being, hooked into them and being controlled by them. And I often think about them as like waves that you're in the sea and you're getting bashed about by the waves. But by just stepping back, we can always sit on the boat and we can just realize that the waves are just going to flow by us.
And I guess what's good about that is you can recognize that, they're always going to be coming and you don't have to take action on any of those. You can choose the ones as long as you can take that kind of step backwards and be like, okay, so these are the thoughts and the actions that I actually want to go and do, right?
Exactly it. So once you can take that step back and you say, okay, I feel really tired. My class example of because the chimp's smart, right? He will get in there and he'll give you really good sort of incentives, and it'll be like a classic example is like, I really want to find out who the killer was on that true crime I was watching. I really wouldn't mind. I want to know who it's going to be, and I won't be able to do that if I go for the run. Well, actually, take a step back. Let's look at that thought. Yes, feels great, right? I do want to see that. You're going to get that short-term release. But when you then look at the bigger picture by taking a step back and you can think about, your long-term goal of doing this, well, is that action of staying at home, watching that true crime and, staying inside, is it moving you towards or is it moving you away? Mm-hmm. Again, so it comes down to, we call it committed action, right? So a situation occurs, it arises these thoughts and feelings, okay? And you come to a choice point, okay? And you either stay hooked because you haven't recognized that these thoughts are happening, you haven't realized who's in the driving seat, or you take a step back and you become unhooked and you can make that committed action towards this person or this goal that you said you want to achieve because you said it meant something to you.
Spot on. That's a really helpful, I guess, mind framing tool. And as I say, it's going to really be valuable in terms of when we think about how to stay consistent, is once we can recognize the thoughts and the feelings that we're having, to not let the chimp win, right?
100%, yeah.
So I guess what we kind of got to recognize as well is that obviously we'll use this model to try and help that, but sometimes the chimp will win, right? And 100%. I guess in order to stay consistent, what we need to think about, or what we want you guys to think about, is that we don't need to be 100%, because ultimately perfection is not something that anybody can achieve, right? And something that I talk about with my clients a lot is about the 80-20 rule. And this, again, framing similar to the chimp mindset is, okay, so I had someone at the weekend, gone over their calories. Their husband put about 4 tablespoons of oil in, which they then weren't able to track, and they felt like they'd really kind of undone a lot of their progress. But by considering the 80-20 rule, is we only need to be 80% consistent in order to achieve our goals. So then what a phrase that we commonly use is, I'll take that as a 20%. So then this client, they'd be like, okay, so I can't control that meal because my husband has done X, Y, Z. So then what she did is say to herself and said in the group, I'm just going to take that as a 20% and then move on to the next thing. Because what we find is it's not when you come off plan that is really going to hamper achieving your goals. It's how you then react to it, because as long as you can consider that this is going to happen along the journey, is that when it does come, you just like, I'll just take that as the 20%, draw a line in the sand, and then you get straight back on the next day. It's when, you let a Friday night takeaway and ice cream. It could be that as an example. It's when you're like, okay, so I've then fucked up all my progress. So then Saturday you're like, oh, well, I might as well eat X, Y, and Z because, I'm feeling really bad. And then that Sunday, and then Monday comes around, you're like, I'm feeling really lazy and lethargic, and I feel really bad on myself, so I'm not going to get back on it. If you can just have that mental frame and just be like, I'm just going to take that as a 20%, drawing the line in the sand, get back on it the very next day, then ultimately that is how you're going to consistently achieve your long-term goals. And it's not by being perfect, it's by recognizing that perfection is not something that we're striving for, but ultimately it's progress.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so valuable to know that. And again, right, that spiral that we start going into, and that I feel this way, so now I want to do this. What are we chasing here? Well, we're chasing the short term little hits. We know that if I eat that chocolate, it's gonna like taste good, it's gonna feel good. Nice little bit of dopamine that I'm hitting here, right? We're trying to chase the short term benefits, and the person that's in the driving seat again is our chimp. So I really like that example. And I think the 80-20 is so key because you're gonna slip up, right? You are human, and because you're human, it means you're an animal. So not an animal in the sense like you're you're an animal. So you're going to make mistakes. But what you need to do is catch yourself and be kind to yourself. Be like, look, I knew this was going to happen, but how can I now reset and get back on track? What do I need to do? Okay, in the short term, it's not going to feel as nice, but actually in the long term, I'm going to be really grateful for it and it's going to be really beneficial to me. Another little, just a quick tip and trick that I want to throw in there as well is using visualization as a little tool to just again feel what that sense of achievement would be like when you eventually get to that goal. Okay, the chimp one is really loud, and the reason why I want to mention this is because it really it quietens it down, right? We want to give the chimp something. So actually when you do visualization properly, and that means actually trying to picture not just like the feeling, but try and picture, okay, where will I be? What will I be feeling like? What will I be looking like? Really try and make it as realistic as possible. Okay. And then what you're doing is you're also tapping into those different chemicals in the brain that we are craving, that we want to get. And what you're doing is making that look more realistic again. So the utilization of visualization, I know people throw it in and they don't really talk about the power of it as much, and it just sort of sounds like this wishy-washy little tool, like, do some visualization. But no, actually, when you do it properly, and the reason why it's so popular is because it can be a real nice tool just to reset you and make you remember what it's going to feel like when you hit that long-term outcome goal that you've been working towards.
I think that's amazing, and that's a really, really, great extra tip to get in there. So I'm really glad you shared that. So then thinking about and linking it back to hopefully what you guys have learned from today, talking about becoming ruthlessly consistent. We've obviously talked about the importance of staying consistent, because ultimately consistency is key in being able to achieve your goal. We've talked about systems, and ultimately because there are going to be days where you're unmotivated, and it's your systems and what you have in place and hitting those daily goals that's going to help you get there. We talked about the habits and how you actually make things easy for yourself, giving yourself the path of least resistance and making it so you can achieve those habits, and what habits can you put in place to ultimately take you closer towards your goal. A very, very important part of that is being able to track that progress visually, and what thing are you using or what system are you using to be able to track that in order to, so you can see very, very clearly, are you moving that needle to become the person that is achieving your goal or actually achieving that goal. We've spoken about accountability, how to make yourself accountable ultimately to other people and not to that inner chimp, which is obviously super important. And then obviously not striving for complete perfection, which is unattainable for absolutely everybody, but it's actually considering that there are going to be slip-ups along the way, and then understanding that as long as you take it as your 20% and you are hitting that 80% consistency, that is how you are ultimately going to achieve your goals. We always like to leave you guys with some homework and some questions for you to take away and to ask yourselves. So the question number 1 is, when you've got to think about those daily goals that you're going to hit, you've really, really got to take the time to consider, is this sustainable for me long term? Because if that answer is no, then ultimately you are setting yourself up to failure. And it's that consistency that we want. So it doesn't need to be perfection. It doesn't need to be 5 gym sessions a week, when realistically, if you can only stick to 2, we would rather you set yourself 2 and actually be more consistent with those 2 than setting yourself 5 and not being able to hit that consistently. So really, the first question you've got to ask yourself is it sustainable for me long term?
Yeah, great. And then following that one up is, what is the smallest step I can take today? And I really like this one because I fall back to this all the time, especially if I'm like, I don't want to go to the gym, or I just don't want to go and do this form of exercise, is the 1% rule, right? If I am doing something every day in my exercise life that is making me 1% better, then like that's already a small win that I've got compared to if I didn't go out and do that thing that I was worrying or stressing about every day. So it's that, what is the smallest step you can take that's going to feel like a little win and is going to make yourself 1% better? Because I can guarantee you, if you're doing 1% every single day, well, that's 7% by the end of the week. And also you're going to have days where you just don't feel like doing it. You're going to have days where you're feeling like you're doing 100% better, right? So let's stack up these small wins, those little 1% that just top up, and just, keep building that person that you're trying to turn into.
Bang on. And the third and final question we have for you is, if I fall off track, because it will happen. So if I fall off track, how will I get back on? And for me, and for a lot of my clients, it's just recognizing that you have, saying, take the 20%, drawing a line in the sand, and then just getting straight back on it when you can. I'm not sure what happened to my voice there.
Yeah, I really love that. And actually, I'm going to throw in an additional question.
Bonus question.
Not because I want to make it even, but actually just because of it's one of my favorite sort of exercises to do with clients, which is give your chimp a name. Think of someone. It can be fictional, it can be a real person, it can be someone in sport, it can be someone in a movie or a TV show or a children's show. But think of someone that is illogical, they're irrational, they only react by emotion, they don't think about the long-term repercussions of their actions, and place that person as your chimp, because now suddenly it makes it a lot more real. So you can turn around and say, I'm noticing that, I'm trying to think of a name of it.
Karen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
Karen.
There you go. So Dave's going to have Karen, right? So you can say, I'm noticing that Karen is actually thinking this, or is making me behave and act in a certain way. But it's just another way of really personifying that little chimp within you. Okay. And again, giving yourself some of that distance when it gets tough.
Absolutely bang on. And as you guys know, we like to leave you guys with a quote of the day. And this week, it's Tony's turn. What have you got for us?
Yeah. So I've gone for, the fears we don't face become our limits. And I really like this quote because I think it speaks to a lot of what I've had to do this year in trying to grow my own like personal work, and just trying to put myself out there and getting involved in communities, and having to sort of, and within that, standing up and doing speeches and having to do a lot of reach out to potential like partners, and having to, like business partners, not just like partners in general, but having to do a lot of these reaching out, even just sitting here doing the podcast, right? There's a lot of fear that comes in. There's a lot of unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. And I think if I'd have let that take over me, if I'd have let that, chimp within me turn around and say, no, let's not do this. This could be embarrassing. This could be this, playing the what if game, it would have really held me back. And some of the stuff that I've had from this year has really come about from just going for it, and actually just not being tied down by this fear of unknown or this worry of what could happen, the what ifs. It's actually just saying, you know what, I want to achieve this, therefore I'm going to go out and do it, and I'll deal with whatever happens when it comes.
I think that's an amazing one. And I think public speaking is a great example to use, because I feel like a lot of people do potentially fear that. And what this quote is saying is that if you let that fear, if you let that determine your actions, then ultimately that's what's going to limit you in terms of where you want to get to. And the only way that you are going to ultimately improve that is facing into that fear, going into the headwind, and then ultimately once you come out the other side, it's no longer a limitation, but actually it's a really great opportunity for you to then take forward into other parts of your life.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's a nice way to finish it for the episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks as always to everybody that's listening. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share it with a friend or family member who you think could do with becoming more ruthlessly consistent. And thank you guys once again, and we'll see you in next week's episode.
Cheers, everyone.